The night I closed the door on my wife and didn't look back, I told myself it was just for a few weeks. I needed air. I needed to stop drowning. I figured by the time the snow melted, we'd find our way back to each other the way couples do in those magazine articles she used to read out loud at breakfast. I was wrong about almost everything that year, but I was most wrong about that. My name doesn't matter much for what happened. But for the sake of telling this right, you can call me what my old coworkers called me, back when I still had coworkers. Holden. Holden Westmoreland. I'm 42. Or I was when this all started. I'd spent 16 years as a senior structural engineer at a firm in Pittsburgh called Brennan Tate, designing the bones of buildings most people never look twice at. Office towers, parking garages, a community hospital out in Latrobe that I was particularly proud of. The kind of work where if I did my job right, nobody ever noticed. My wife. I should tell you about her. We met at a wedding in 2014, both of us seated at the table nobody else wanted. The one tucked behind a column near the kitchen doors. I'd been set up by my cousin, and she'd been brought along by a coworker she barely knew. We spent the whole reception making fun of the speeches and stealing extra slices of cake from the unused settings. By the end of the night, I had her number written on a cocktail napkin. By the end of the year, she'd moved into my apartment in Squirrel Hill. We were married 18 months after that. A small ceremony at her parents' farm outside Greensburg, just 60 people and a borrowed sound system. For 5 years, it was good. Better than good. She worked as a pediatric speech therapist at a clinic downtown, and I'd come home some evenings to find her on the kitchen floor practicing tongue exercises in a mirror, trying to figure out how to teach some kid with a cleft palate to say the letter S. She was patient in a way I never was. Patient with her kids, patient with me, patient with the slow way our lives were unfolding. When she told me she was pregnant in the spring of 2022, I cried in the car driving home from work, pulled over on the Fort Pitt Bridge, and just sat there with my hazards on until a state trooper knocked on the window and asked if I needed help. I told him I was about to be a dad. He laughed and said congratulations and told me to get moving before I caused a wreck. She was 26 weeks along when it happened. I was at a job site in Robinson Township, walking the third floor of a half-finished medical office building, when my phone started buzzing. I didn't answer the first time. I almost didn't answer the second. When I finally picked up, it was her sister, not her. Her sister was crying and trying to talk at the same time, and all I could make out was hospital and Allegheny General, and you need to come now. I don't remember the drive. I remember the parking garage, the elevator, the long fluorescent hallway. I remember the look on the doctor's face before he said anything. That particular kind of professional sadness they teach you in medical school. The baby was gone. My wife had nearly bled out. They'd done an emergency procedure to save her. She was stable, but she was, in his words, going to need significant time to recover. He meant physically. None of us knew yet what the other recovery would look like. I named him in my head. The baby. We hadn't picked anything official yet. We were still arguing between two finalists. But lying in that hospital room at 3 a.m. listening to my wife breathe, I started calling him by the name she'd liked best. I never told her I did that. I never told her I did that. I never told anyone. It felt like something I had to keep for myself. She came home 4 days later, and the woman who walked through our front door was not the woman I had driven to the hospital. I want to be careful here because I don't want to make her into a villain. She wasn't. She was a person who had been broken in a place that doesn't heal on a schedule. But the practical truth was that she stopped talking. Not all at once. It happened in increments. First, she stopped talking about the baby, which I understood. Then she stopped talking about the baby, which I understood. Then she stopped talking about her work. Then she stopped talking about dinner, about the weather, about whether the dog needed to be walked. By the end of that first month home, the longest conversation we had in a day was about whether I'd remembered to pick up her prescription. I tried everything I knew how to try. I made her favorite breakfast on Saturdays, French toast with the bourbon syrup her dad used to make. She'd take 2 bites and push the plate away. I bought her flowers, the white peonies she used to keep on her desk at the clinic. She put them in a vase without looking at them. I suggested couples therapy, and she looked at me like I'd suggest to resell the house and move to Mars. I don't need to pay someone to tell me how to grieve, she said. That was the longest sentence she'd spoken to me in 9 days. Meanwhile, my own world was coming apart in a different direction. My firm had signed a contract with a tech company out of Austin that was using machine learning to do structural analysis. The pitch to the partners was that an algorithm could run load calculations in 40 seconds that took a senior engineer like me 3 days. They started a pilot program. 3 months later, they expanded it. 6 months later, my manager called me into his office on a Friday afternoon and told me they were eliminating 12 senior positions across the firm. I was one of them. He said all the things you say in those meetings. He fought for me. The numbers were impossible. The board had spoken. I would get 6 months of severance and a recommendation letter. I walked out of that building carrying a banker's box with my desk plant and my framed photo of my wife from our honeymoon in Charleston, and I sat in my car in the parking garage for an hour and a half before I could make myself drive home. I didn't tell her that night. She was already in bed when I got in, lying with her back to my side of the mattress the way she did now. I told her the next morning over coffee. I said the words and waited. She looked at me for a long moment, and then she said, "What are you going to do?" Not we. You. I want to tell you that I didn't notice the pronoun. I noticed it. I noticed it the way you notice a hairline crack in a load-bearing beam. It doesn't bring the building down right away. It just tells you what's coming. For 3 months after that, I tried to hold the line. I started picking up freelance work, small jobs reviewing plans for residential contractors out in the suburbs. The pay was a fraction of what I'd been making, but it was something. I learned the new software the firms were using. I sat in coffee shops with my laptop because the silence at home had gotten so heavy I could feel it pressing on my chest when I tried to work there. She came home later and later. Sometimes she didn't come home for dinner at all. She said she was picking up extra shifts at a satellite clinic in Bethel Park. I had no reason to disbelieve her. I had no reason to believe her either. There was a night in late October. I'd been home alone for 6 hours waiting on her. The chicken I'd roasted was cold on the counter. When she finally came in around 10, she didn't even take off her coat. She went straight to the bedroom and shut the door. I sat at the kitchen table for another hour. Then I did something I'm not proud of. I took her phone out of her purse, which she'd left on the bench in the hallway. I tried her old passcode, the one she'd used for years. Our anniversary backwards. It worked. I scrolled. Messages, emails, call log. Nothing. No mystery numbers, no flirty texts, no hotel charges on the credit card she had linked to her wallet app. I put the phone back exactly where I'd found it, and I went and sat on the couch in the dark, and I felt worse than I'd felt before I'd looked. Because if she wasn't running from me toward someone else, then she was just running from me, and that was somehow harder to take. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in November. I'd had 3 rough days of freelance work bidding on a project I knew I wasn't going to get. I came home, and she was in our bedroom, with a suitcase open on the bed, the way she folded her sweaters into it, careful, methodical, the same way she used to fold them for our trips to her parents for Christmas. It broke something in me I didn't know was still whole. I asked her where she was going. She said her sister's. I asked her how long. She said she didn't know. I asked if this was the end. She zipped the suitcase shut and said she didn't know that either. She said she needed to figure out if there was anything left worth saving, and she couldn't do it in the same house as me. Something in me went very still. I want to say I was calm, but it wasn't calm. It was the absence of everything. I told her, "Go. Take as long as you need. But when you come back to figure out what's left, I won't be here." She looked at me for the first time in what felt like months. Really looked at me, and she said, "You don't mean that." I said, "I do." I helped her carry the suitcase to her car. Neither of us said anything in the elevator. When she drove away, I stood in the lobby of our building and watched the taillights disappear around the corner. And I went upstairs and I packed. I took 2 duffel bags, clothes, my laptop, my engineering license, my passport, the photo of my mother who died when I was 19. I left her the dog because the dog had always been more hers than mine. I left her the furniture, the wedding china, the framed sonogram we'd put on the bookshelf and never had the heart to take down. I left her my keys on the kitchen island, and I drove. I drove north and east through the night. No plan, just the headlights and the empty interstate. I crossed into New York around 3 in the morning and kept going. By dawn, I was somewhere in the Adirondacks, the trees coming down to the road on both sides, and I pulled into a gas station in a town whose name I didn't catch. There was a flyer taped to the inside of the window. Cabin for rent. Off-season rate. A phone number with the area code I'd never seen. I called it from the parking lot. An old man named Henry answered. He told me the cabin was 4 miles up a dirt road on the edge of a lake called Tupper. $200 a week. Cash, no questions. I drove out there and met him at the front porch. He looked at me. This guy in a wrinkled button-down with 2 days of stubble and red eyes, and he didn't ask a single thing. He just handed me the key and told me the well water was good, but the propane heater was tricky, and to come find him if I had trouble. The first night in that cabin, I slept 14 hours. I hadn't slept that long since I was a teenager. I woke up to sunlight on the wood floor and the sound of a loon somewhere out on the lake, and for the first time in over a year, my chest didn't feel like it was full of broken glass. I stayed up there through the winter. I'm not going to pretend it was peaceful the whole time. The first month, I cried in places I didn't expect to cry. In the shower. In the truck. Driving to the grocery store 30 miles away. Once at the kitchen table looking at a coffee mug she'd given me 3 Christmases ago that I'd thrown in my bag without thinking. I cried for the baby. I cried for her. I cried for the version of myself that had still believed, 6 months earlier, that we could fix this if I just tried harder. I found work. I set up freelance accounts under my own name and pitched myself to small construction outfits in upstate New York and Vermont. Guys who built barns and lake houses and didn't need fancy machine learning, just an engineer who could stamp a set of drawings. The work came in slowly at first and then steadily. I learned to do my Zoom calls from the kitchen table with the lake behind me, and clients started saying I had the nicest office setup they'd ever seen. I started running again, something I hadn't done since college. I started cooking actual meals for myself. Henry, my landlord, hired me to help him rebuild his boathouse, and twice a week through the spring I spent afternoons swinging a hammer in exchange for venison from his freezer, and the kind of silent company old men give you when they sense you're working something out. I didn't call her. I didn't email her. I didn't check our joint Facebook account. I bought a new phone with a new number, and I left the old one in the drawer in the cabin. Some nights I thought about her. Some nights I didn't. I've been afraid that the not thinking would be a betrayal of something, but it turned out the not thinking was just my body learning how to breathe again. I want to be honest about something. About 4 months into my time at the cabin, I met someone. Her name was a teacher at the elementary school in the town 20 miles south. We met at the only diner that served breakfast all day. She had a kind face and a divorce 3 years behind her and a way of laughing that didn't ask for anything. We had coffee, then we had dinner, then we had 2 more dinners. Nothing happened. I told her I was still legally married, that I didn't know what I was doing with my life, that I couldn't promise her anything. She said she appreciated my honesty, and that she enjoyed my company, and that she wasn't asking for promises. We stopped seeing each other after that, without ever really saying we were stopping. But I think about her sometimes. She was a kindness at a moment I didn't know I was allowed to receive kindness. The accident happened in May. I was helping Henry pull a stump out of his yard with a winch on his old tractor. The chain we were using was older than I was, and it snapped under tension and whipped back and caught me across the side of the knee. I went down hard. I knew right away it was bad. The pain was the kind that makes the edges of your vision go white. Henry got me to his truck and drove me to the small hospital in Saranac Lake, and the doctor there took one look at the x-rays and said I was looking at a complete patellar tendon rupture, possibly with damage to the meniscus, and I needed orthopedic surgery from someone who did this kind of work all the time. I didn't have insurance anymore. My COBRA had lapsed 3 months earlier when I couldn't afford the payment. The closest surgeon who'd take a cash patient on a payment plan was a guy in Pittsburgh, recommended by a friend of Henry's nephew. Pittsburgh. I sat in that exam room with my leg propped up on a stool, and I thought about every other option. I thought about driving to Albany. I thought about going to a cousin in Cleveland. I thought about just letting the leg heal wrong and walking with a limp for the rest of my life. None of those were real options. The surgeon in Pittsburgh was the one who'd see me on a payment plan. Pittsburgh was where I had to go. I called the only person I could think of. My old college roommate, a guy named Cal, who'd stood next to me at my wedding and whose calls I'd stopped returning the previous summer because I couldn't face explaining what was happening. He picked up on the second ring. I said his name and started to apologize, and he stopped me. He said, "Where are you?" I told him. He said, "I'll come get you tomorrow morning." He drove 8 hours to that cabin and another 8 hours back. He didn't ask me a single question about where I'd been or what had happened. He just helped me into his car and put my leg up on a pillow and drove me home to the city I'd sworn I'd never go back to. I had surgery on a Wednesday. Cal and his wife set me up in their finished basement in Mount Lebanon, a clean little apartment with its own bathroom and a kitchenette. They told me I could stay as long as I needed. Cal's wife brought me dinner on a tray the first 3 nights and pretended she wasn't checking to make sure I was eating. By the fourth night, I was up on crutches and making my own toast, but she still came down and sat with me sometimes, just to talk. They're good people. I don't deserve friends that good. It was a week after my surgery, when I was hopping around the basement on crutches trying to make my own coffee, that Cal came down the stairs with a strange look on his face. He sat down on the edge of the couch, and he said, "Listen, I need to tell you something, and I don't know how you're going to want to handle it. Your wife knows you're back." I felt my stomach drop. I asked him how. He said he'd run into her sister at a gas station in Shadyside 2 days earlier. He hadn't planned to say anything, but the sister had asked, point blank, if he'd heard from me, and he'd panicked and told the truth. He said the sister had cried. He said the sister had told him that my wife had been looking for me for 14 months, that she'd hired a private investigator at one point and given up because there was nothing to find, that she had been in therapy twice a week since the previous summer, that she had moved out of our old place 6 months ago and was renting a small house in Regent Square, that she had been waiting. I sat with that for a long time. Cal didn't push me. He went back upstairs and gave me my space. I lay on that couch in his basement, and I tried to figure out what I felt, and the honest answer was that I didn't know. I'd spent 15 months learning how to not think about her, and now she was 30 minutes away across the river, and she'd been looking for me the whole time. 3 days later, I texted her from my new number. I just said, "It's me. I'm in town. I had surgery on my knee. I'm okay. I'm staying with Cal." She didn't answer for 2 hours. When she did, all she wrote back was, "Can I come see you?" I said yes. She came on a Saturday afternoon. Cal's wife had baked something. The whole house smelled like cinnamon. I'd been awake since 5 in the morning trying to figure out what to wear, which is the stupidest thing in the world for a 43-year-old man to be doing. But there I was, sitting on the edge of the bed in a clean shirt, my crutches against the wall. I heard the doorbell. I heard Cal's wife answer. I heard footsteps on the basement stairs. My wife looked older. Not in the bad way. In the way that people look older when they've actually been doing the work of being alive. Her hair was shorter. She'd lost a little weight. There were small new lines at the corners of her eyes. She stood at the bottom of the stairs, and she didn't come any closer, and I didn't get up. She said my name. Just my name. The way she used to say it before everything went wrong. I said hers back. We sat for a long time before either of us said anything real. She took the armchair across from the couch. She kept her purse on her lap like it was a shield. Finally, she asked what had happened to my leg, and I told her about Henry and the stump and the chain. She asked where I'd been, and I told her about the cabin and the lake. She asked if I'd been alone the whole time. I thought about the teacher from the elementary school. I told her the truth. I told her I'd had a few dinners with a woman over the winter, but that nothing had happened and that I wasn't in any kind of relationship. I told her I owed her honesty, even if I didn't owe her anything else. She nodded. She didn't cry, but her eyes filled. She said, "I don't expect to have a right to be jealous, but I am. A little. And I want you to know that." Then she said the thing I'd been waiting 15 months to hear without knowing I was waiting for it. She said, "I'm so sorry. For all of it. For shutting you out. For letting you carry it alone. For making you feel like our son's death wasn't yours too." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I just sat there on Cal's basement couch with my reconstructed knee throbbing and tears running into my collar, and I let her say it. She said her therapist had helped her understand things she hadn't been able to see. That she'd been so angry at her body for failing the baby that she transferred the anger to me because I was the only person whose body hadn't failed. That she'd built a whole story in her head where I was at fault, and she'd needed that story to survive. And the cost of needing it had been us. I told her I had my own version. I told her I'd spent the first 6 months at the cabin, convinced she'd been cheating on me. I told her I'd looked at her phone. I said it because she needed to know I wasn't blameless either, that I'd done my own kind of damage. She just nodded. She said she didn't blame me. She said in my position, she probably would have done the same. We talked for 4 hours. Cal's wife brought down sandwiches at some point and left them on the table without saying anything. We didn't eat them. We just talked. About the baby. About the months before I left. About what she'd done with herself in the months after. She'd quit the satellite clinic. She'd gone back to her old job downtown. She'd started running too, which made us both laugh because we'd never been runners. She said the grief group at her church had saved her life. She asked if I had a grief group. I told her no, but that I'd had a lake and a quiet old man and time. She said that counted. She didn't ask me to come back. I didn't offer. We weren't there yet, neither of us. But when she left that evening, she stood at the bottom of the stairs with her coat over her arm and she said, "Can we do this again? Not tomorrow, but soon." I said yes. We did it again and again. Over the next 6 weeks, while my knee healed, she came to Cal's basement every Saturday afternoon. We talked about everything we hadn't been able to talk about. We talked about the baby by his name, the name I'd been calling him in my head for 15 months. And it turned out she'd been calling him by the same name. We agreed we'd never thanked each other for the years that had been good before he died. We started thanking each other for them now. In July, when I was off crutches and walking with just a brace, I moved into a small studio apartment in Bloomfield. I told her I wanted to be near her, but not in the same house yet. She said she understood. We had dinner together 2 nights a week. We saw the same therapist together once a week. We took it slow in the way people in books always say they're going to take it slow, and then don't. We actually did. We didn't move back in together until the following spring. 18 months after the cabin, 2 years and 7 months after we lost our son, we bought a smaller house out in Edgewood, nothing fancy. A brick place with a screened porch and a maple tree in the backyard. We left the wedding china in storage. We bought new dishes. I want to tell you that everything is perfect now. It isn't. There are still bad nights. There are still times. She pulls away and I have to remind myself that pulling away is her language for grief, not a verdict on me. There are times I get short with her and I have to remember that my impatience is mine to carry, not hers to absorb. We fight sometimes, but we fight in the open now. We fight in the room where the other person is, not in the silence after they've left. Last fall, on a Tuesday morning in October, she came into the kitchen while I was making coffee and she put a small white envelope on the counter next to my mug. She didn't say anything. I opened it. There was a single piece of paper inside, a printout from the doctor she'd been seeing. 12 weeks. Healthy heartbeat. Low-risk pregnancy at her age, but no current complications. I sat down on the kitchen floor. I just sat down, right there in front of the dishwasher. She came and sat down next to me. I asked her if she was scared. She said terrified. I asked her if she was happy. I asked her if she was happy. She said terrified and happy were the same word right now. Our daughter was born this past June. She is 6 weeks old as I write this. She has her mother's mouth and my hairline, which my wife thinks is hilarious. We named her after my mother and her grandmother together, a long, old-fashioned name that doesn't fit on most forms. We call her by a short version most of the time. She is the loudest, hungriest, most alive thing I have ever seen. Sometimes at 3 in the morning, when I'm walking her around the living room, and my wife is finally getting an hour of sleep on the couch, I think about the man who drove away from Pittsburgh in November, 2 duffel bags in the trunk, no plan, no destination. I think about the man who slept 14 hours that first night at the lake. I think about every road I took to get from there to here. And I think about how close I came, more than once, to not making it back. I don't know what the lesson is. I'm not sure stories like this have lessons. But if I had to tell you one thing, it would be this. Sometimes the only way back to the person you love is the road that takes you the farthest from them. Sometimes you have to lose the marriage to find out if the marriage is real. Sometimes leaving is not the opposite of staying. Sometimes leaving is just the long way home. That's all I've got. That's the whole thing. Thank you for sitting with me through it. I've thought about it 1,000 times since our daughter was born, trying to figure out the shape of what happened to us. And the honest answer I keep coming back to is that every single thing in our story was a consequence of something earlier, a thread pulled tight by an earlier knot. When my wife shut me out after we lost our son, I told myself she was being cruel. She wasn't. She was doing the only thing her grief knew how to do, and the cause of that grief was not her, and it was not me. It was just what had happened to us. But the cause of what happened next, that part was on both of us. She built a wall because she didn't know any other way to stay standing. I respected that wall instead of climbing it, because part of me was relieved not to have to talk about the baby out loud. We made each other lonelier on purpose, and we called it giving each other space. I learned something at that cabin on Tupper Lake that I don't think I could have learned anywhere else. I learned that running from a problem and walking away from it are 2 different things, and the difference is whether you're carrying anything with you when you go. I left Pittsburgh with 2 duffel bags and the full weight of who I was, including the parts I didn't like. I sat with that weight every morning on Henry's porch until it stopped feeling like punishment and started feeling like inventory. That's the part nobody tells you about leaving. You don't escape yourself. You finally have to meet yourself. If there's anything I want my daughter to know someday about how she came into this world, it is this. Her mother and I did not get here because we were good at marriage. We got here because we were both willing, eventually, to be honest about how badly we had failed at it. Honesty is the harder thing. Anyone can leave. Anyone can stay angry. The thing almost no one can do is sit across a basement couch from the person they once hurt and say I'm sorry without conditions, and then keep showing up the next Saturday and the next Saturday after that. I don't think people are broken or unbroken. I think we're all carrying something, and the only choice we really have is whether to carry it alone or whether to let someone help us carry it. My wife and I tried alone for over a year. It almost cost us our marriage, and it definitely cost us a chunk of our lives we'll never get back. What we have now, the small brick house in Edgewood, and this loud, hungry baby, and these careful Saturday morning conversations about how we're really doing. We built it on the ruins of everything we couldn't say before. The strength didn't come from never falling. It came from learning how to stand back up next to each other instead of apart.